Hi guys, from the Thoughtful Gardener. I recently saw an article regarding a scientist who has developed a tower that will replace trees to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. Are you kidding me right now? Okay, as if this is the only environmental issue that we have. We are not solving the equation here for X. We're solving the equation for X, Y, Z, and all the other letters that appear in the alphabet. So let's go through a few reasons why a real tree is better than a fake tree, and talk to you about why I think you should join the 1 billion tree challenge. We're going to talk about that at the end of this video, so stay tuned. So recently, a scientist from Arizona is working to create a tower that will suck carbon out of the atmosphere, and then he's not quite sure exactly what they're going to do with that, but it's going to suck carbon out of the atmosphere because we don't have room for 1 billion trees. Again, carbon is necessary to grow plants, and plants are what humans and animals eat. And if we don't have plants, we don't eat. I know that sounds really basic, but that's the reality of the situation. Carbon makes it possible for us to be able to eat. So while I can appreciate that you want to remove carbon from the atmosphere, it's actually a necessary thing. Number 2, trees recycle themselves. I'm going to seriously doubt that this thing can be easily recycled. We're seeing that challenge right now with windmills. Once they're defunct and no longer usable, there's nowhere to dispose of them. So I'm wondering if this tower is recyclable. See, the beauty of trees is not only do they suck carbon out of the atmosphere, but they store it underground for free. And one thing this scientist hasn't figured out is once he's sucked it out of the atmosphere, what exactly is he going to do with it? I'm going to assume he's going to have to store it in a container, and that container is probably also not recyclable. So why is a tree better than a tower when it comes to carbon and absorbing carbon? Because an oak tree, for example, can store it under the ground safely for thousands of years. I don't know how long this thing can store carbon, but not very long apparently, because he's looking to potentially to sell it to fizzy drink companies as a way to get rid of it. Now, the other thing that trees do is that they provide leaves. Now, this may sound really, really basic, but leaves are super important for many reasons. One, they provide food for caterpillars. Caterpillars are the most efficient use of transfers of energy because they take those leaves and they use them for food. They themselves then become food for birds, and birds require up to 6,000 caterpillars for one nest. I'm going to assume this tower isn't going to house nor feed one bird. So let's be very, very honest about this, is not only are we dealing with a carbon issue, but you're also not dealing with the other things that trees provide, like acorns. Acorns feed wildlife, and acorns can also, in some cases, be eaten by yourself. So not only are leaves potentially edible, fruit potentially edible, nuts potentially edible from trees, but I'm going to assume that your tower doesn't do any of those things. Not only are we looking at the possibility of being housing and food for birds, but those leaves will fall, and those leaves become very, very important because they create new food for more animals. See, there are hundreds of moths that use those leaves to feed themselves during the winter. In addition, other types of butterflies use it as cover. It's super cold here in central Pennsylvania today, and those leaves are providing a very important function, which is protection from the cold. In addition, insects use those leaves and will become next year's beneficial bugs. And those beneficial bugs, like bees, are responsible for you eating today, Mr. Scientist. 1 out of every 3 bites of food you took is courtesy of a pollinator. And many of our native bees, over 4,000, house themselves down in the leaf litter underground or in the pieces of dead wood of trees. So by not focusing on trees, you're not solving the equation for those guys either. So if you like to eat, I'm going to assume you have housing for bees. It's really, really important. Now, speaking of free, the interesting thing about oak trees is that the majority of them are planted for free by blue jays. See, blue jays love acorns and they forget that they've planted them. So 1 out of 8 trees that get planted are planted by a blue jay. So we don't have to pay for that. And I don't know if you're aware, but we're kind of in a crisis right now when it comes to spending too much money on things that we don't need. So I'm going to assure you that by planting trees, we're solving a lot more issues. And one is not costing us anything. See, trees replant themselves in something called a mast year. And we had a mast year here in central Pennsylvania last year. And the reason for that is we had a drought the year before. So that's really, really great. Many, many more trees will be growing themselves because of things like blue jays. In addition, we're currently participating in the 6th greatest mass extinction. It's an insect apocalypse. And you might not be aware, but insects are the little things that run the world. So it's extremely important that we do everything we can to try to prevent their demise. One of the things that we can do is to start with native plants. Native plants also absorb carbon, but are beneficial for our good bugs that live here right in the state of Pennsylvania. Those bugs are responsible for the majority of the pollination in our state, including 1 billion just in apples. So I'm going to tell you that a tower is not going to resolve that. What's going to resolve that is to stop using chemicals irresponsibly, to start using polyculture as part of the solution, and start planting more trees, because trees also do something really important, which is help conserve water. I'm sure you're not aware, but we have a water issue. The majority of the water here in Pennsylvania runs into the Chesapeake Bay, the 6th largest watershed in the world. And why that's important is all kinds of chemicals are being rushed down through our creeks and streams into that watershed, and we routinely get sued by the state of Maryland. That's right. If we could have more trees, we could actually prevent that water runoff that occurs because of development. See, the majority of the United States is privately owned, and that means that the majority of the development is occurring in our own backyards. Over 2 million acres every year get developed here in the United States. And I'm going to assume, Mr. Scientist, that your towers are going to need to stand on an impermeable surface, and that's going to create more water runoff. So that means more fines for people like me to pay to the state of Maryland. I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, sir, and tell you that trees are the answer. And the good news is that everybody on this video can do something about it right now. You can find out about native trees in your own backyards by following your native plant societies, and look at native plants as part of the solution. Native plants are really, really great at storing carbon under the ground, because guess what? They don't have to be dug up every season. They will come back year after year. They're not no maintenance, but they're low maintenance, and they help prevent water runoff. Recently, we had 2 storms this past fall that created a ton of erosion and the migration of Asian jumping worms. Ever heard of those, Mr. Scientist? They destroy soil, but the beauty of oak trees is oak trees have tannin in their leaves, and tannin prevents the march of the Asian jumping worm. I'm going to assume your systems do nothing to address the issues that we currently have with invasive species like our Asian jumping worms. So what am I going to encourage everybody on this video to do? I'm going to encourage you to plant a tree. We can be part of the solution, and we don't need to create new problems for ourselves with things like unrecyclable towers, nowhere to store the carbon, adding to the cost, and creating a situation where we have an impermeable surface that these things have to be installed upon. Instead, you can solve all that today by planting a tree, ideally a native one, and if it'll work for your landscape, an oak tree. Garden thoughtfully and take care.